I'm Iris Muller. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor and a proud mom of 2 children, one of whom has quadriplegic cerebral palsy and is nonverbal.
And I'm Alma Schneider, a licensed clinical social worker and the proud mom of 4 children, one of whom has Prader-Willi syndrome.
In this podcast, we discuss the uncensored truth about raising kids with disabilities.
Prepare to laugh, cry, and hopefully learn something new. This is Two Moms, No Fluff.
Hello, everybody. We are Two Moms, No Fluff. Alma Schneider, my friend, is here, and my colleague, and I'm Iris Muller. We're ready to introduce another episode, which we hope that you'll learn something new and enjoy listening to us, because we have some, I guess, similar experiences to our listeners as moms of kids with disabilities. Alma,
Yes.
You want to introduce the topic?
Of course I would. Today, we are going to be talking about hiring people who are in our children's network. Okay, so I'm going to have Iris, I think I'm going to pass the baton to you because you do a lot more hiring than I do, although I do some hiring.
Yes, Alma, so as you know, it takes a village to raise a typical child, and it takes probably more than a village to raise our children. This is a task that requires a lot of helping hands, and I keep saying that my husband and I could not have done it on our own. I think if we have listeners that are single parents, they probably need even more support and help. And at the end of the day, most of the wonderful gains and achievements that we had in our daughter's life is a result of the other people that came along on this journey and helped us out. So I definitely think that hiring people might be a really daunting concept for some parents. And because I had this notion of like homeschooling and unschooling my kids, and me being the kind of main caregiver, and I won't need any help, and then realizing that I cannot do it all by myself and I do need help, was a big transition in thought and acceptance of the situation. But once I did ask for help, and I started really hiring people. And I want to mention that hiring people, I don't mean necessarily directly paying them myself, but sometimes when you get the help from the state or the, I guess, social services or private insurance, whatever it is that helps you with raising your kid, they pay for the service, but you need to choose your help. So in that situation, you have, I guess, hopefully a pool of people or a few candidates, and you need to choose the best fit for yourself and for your child and the family as a whole. And that's what I wanted to talk about today.
There's a lot. There is a lot. And we all come to parenting with our own history. And I think that on this particular episode, it's really relevant for me to talk about the fact that I never had babysitters growing up, that I'm one of 7 kids. We never had babysitters, and my parents never seemed to go out. And if they did, I guess we were alone. That was when we were older. But we never had babysitters. And even with the 2 children I had before Lincoln, who had the disability, when I had my daughter, I didn't get any babysitter. I never hired a babysitter until she was close to 1 year old. I never had any help because to me, in my family, it was sort of looked down upon. It was like, you're not working, like you don't have a job. And nobody ever said that to me, to be honest. But that was just sort of like, why would you get a babysitter when you don't work and you have 1 child? So it was something that was, I had some shame involved in even getting a babysitter. And I really only got a babysitter for my first kid, who was typical when 9/11 happened. And I wanted to go volunteer as a social worker for the victims' kids in the Armory in New York City. That is what allowed me to feel comfortable hiring a babysitter and having them spend some time with my daughter. And it wasn't easy because she had never been with a stranger before, so by herself. So it's really important that we acknowledge how we feel about receiving help. And we've talked about this in other episodes. Not only receiving help, but receiving help when we're in the situation with a child with a disability, and a lot of the respite care that we may be getting, or babysitters, we might have even more feelings about it, because our kid might be challenging for that person, and that can bring up feelings as well. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, identify it, and address it, because it can cause a lot of stress with the babysitter, with the caregiver, with the therapists that are involved in your child's life, if we're not kind of noting where our what the soft spots are, where we might get upset, or we might feel bad about ourselves, or we might have resentment towards our child if they're not behaving properly with the person who's with them. So that being said, that was really I mentioned in other episodes, we had a wonderful babysitter who was willing to help feed Lincoln with his feeding tube, that I was very self-conscious about, because I felt like it was too much for them to deal with. And this was not a babysitter that dealt with kids with disabilities, but she did it, and she was wonderful. And I felt very fortunate to have had her. As my son got older and his behaviors became more challenging, and we really had to know that somebody was going to be keeping him very safe, it was a little harder. It was very hard to hire someone, because we didn't want to spend a fortune on getting a professional babysitter. And even a bigger issue than that was, we didn't want a stranger in the house. We were used to having babysitters for our other kids when we went out at night, to that knew our family and lived in our community, and they were high school students, and they, it was a fraction of the price of getting a professional person. We were concerned, and we were very fortunate that we had some lovely next door neighbors who were willing to babysit. And fortunately, Lincoln would fall asleep early, so they didn't have to deal too much with him. But we had to have serious discussions with them about the fact that the kitchen doors had to be locked. We felt self-conscious that they weren't allowed to go in our kitchen. A lot of babysitters, if they get hungry, they'll go in the fridge and they'll take something. We literally said, like, this door is going to be locked. You can't go in there. And it's, we had our own, I don't know about anybody else, if my husband felt this way, but I felt very self-conscious that they had to go upstairs to the bathroom. They couldn't use the downstairs bathroom because it was through the kitchen. So hiring people can bring up a lot of emotions. If somebody, fortunately, we never had this with our younger babysitters, but when we had older babysitters through the state who were respite workers, we felt uncomfortable because it was free for us. We sort of, and I think a lot of people feel this way when they get benefits from the state for respite care or for babysitting, we don't feel as comfortable calling them on things that, if we were paying someone or out of pocket, or if we just from our own nature, it's uncomfortable to say, you're not doing this in a way that I'm comfortable with. Any kind of a, quote unquote confrontation can be awkward, but it can be even more awkward sometimes when you have a child with a disability, or less awkward because it's so straightforward, because it's a life and death issue. But one example is, we've had respite workers, and again, we didn't choose the respite workers. We had a choice to not have them if we didn't want to, but we didn't have like a pool of people that we were choosing from. We were given a survey. We had to fill it out to talk about Lincoln's behaviors and his needs and his triggers. And we had some great people, but some of the people would cancel at the last minute, or they would, just say, I'm not feeling so great, so I'm not going to come, or I'm really tired, so I'm not going to come. And, had that been someone that we had personally hired, we would have been like, to say that to your employer is not really, it's not cool. And it's not cool either if you're paid by the state. But I had some awkwardness because it felt like a bonus for us to get the respite care, which is very different from, somebody like you, Iris, who you really depend on that for a lot of reasons, to have that care. For us, it was like, respite, which is necessary, but, we would count on it. We would say this person is coming for 3 hours for this day, and we're going to take advantage of that time while she takes Lincoln out. And then she would cancel, and we wouldn't be able to do what we were going to do. And it was tough because unfortunately the pay is very low for people, depending on what state you live in, and it's usually an additional job. Oftentimes people are paraprofessionals, and this is an extra job for them, on the weekends or after school, and they may not need the money as much, so they don't take it as seriously. And that's, I think, an ongoing issue for a lot of people who have this respite care from the state, that it's not, a lot of the people just don't take, a lot of people take it very seriously and they're very committed and dedicated, but some people are not. And I think that that's just how it is in the real world anyway, but it's very hard when you have a child who, and a lot of people who have children with disabilities are going to be able to relate to this, who do not like change. And if you get notice at the last second that somebody is not coming and your child was excited to go on a hike with them, which was planned, or go to the movies, or just go out into the community, it can be upsetting. So not only were we not getting our respite care, we were then left with a child who was very upset, disappointed, possibly tantruming, but also feeling like their self-esteem, could be affected by this. Like, why do they always do this? Like, they never, why don't they tell us, why are they not coming? And it affects a child. And, I know you have more to say about that, Iris, because you have a lot more workers in your life. So I'll let you speak to that. But that's something that we've experienced,
Yes.
once in a while.
Alma, this is where I think things are very, very delicate, because the people that we hire have a relationship that is very intimate and special with our children, and our children get emotionally attached. For them, that person is a friend. It's not like a care provider. And when they have someone that they liked suddenly leave because they found a better paying job, or someone who doesn't show up for a shift that they were really expecting to play such and such game or do such and such activity, the hurt is so bad that we can't compensate for that. The only thing that we can do is to make our best effort in the situations that we do have control over, choosing who would come into our lives, and to try to eliminate and decrease the probability that something like that happens. Even with that, things do happen. I have to admit that I didn't find yet a fail-proof method. But I want to, before I go to maybe more details about how to interview someone and how to find the best match for your family, to go back to that, I think, dilemma of hiring someone, bringing someone into your life, being terrified that you can't leave your child with the complex disability in the hands of someone else, and to maybe suggest something that was the in-between method that we decided to do at the beginning. And that was because I was so terrified, because Karen could easily choke while eating, and she had, so many things that could go wrong, that I was really afraid of having someone else at the house. But I, again, me with my list, I made a list of the activities that are very simple to do with her, that she really enjoys. Back then she was a toddler, that other people can do with her while I'm there, maybe in the room, or while they're on the carpet, in the living room, while I'm in the open kitchen, half looking at them and seeing what they're doing with her. So I would relieve myself from physically handling her, holding her, supporting her, holding a toy for her, doing things that any other person can do, but I was still there in the room, either working on my computer or cooking while they were playing, etc. And then it helped me maximize my time, but I had sometimes months of observing a person with her, And through that, both Karen's confidence in the caregiver increased and my confidence in them and how they resolved kind of difficult situations, how they physically handled her body, and how they dealt with, questions and communication challenges. So this is a method that I really recommend. This is worth anything, beyond an interview, because an interview is a snippet of time, and some people really do know how to interview very well, but do they have the perseverance and the moral standards to stick with it for the long run? Not always. And it's hard to always know that on basis of a 1-hour conversation. So that's my recommendation. And I want to also say something kind of additional, is that in a situation that you do need help and you cannot afford it, and you're still not getting services paid for by insurance or the state or an agency that is helping with the care for children with disabilities, I want to recommend, and people might their ears would burn, using a teenager as a mother's helper and taking someone who's completely unqualified, but teaching them the basics, the things that are very, very easy to do, including maybe just snuggling on the sofa with your child and they read books out loud, lying on the carpet and holding a toy above your child's head, whatever it is that might be appropriate for your child, that any person can do. And then A, the cost is minimal, and B, you are still there in the room with them. So the risk level is very little because you're constantly there. So that's that. Now, when it comes to hiring, or Alma, what did you want to say?
No, I was just going to say that that we've done that quite a few times, having a young person come and just hang out, and they can be outside, and like you said, you can be nearby, but just it's great for the for a young kid who wants to make a little bit of money. And some of the best people that I've had who understood Lincoln the best and where he didn't get upset were these young people who were not trained. They had never done this before, but they were just nice people. And, your daughter requires more physical, care at this point in time. But as a baby, as a young kid who is able to get around and doesn't require all the medical type care, it just don't dismiss that. Getting young kids, even like a fourth grader, depending on the age of your child, or a middle schooler or a high schooler, that can be very, very inexpensive. And they could also do it. Sometimes it's for credit for school, or they are doing it as a volunteer. There are all different ways to get some help, but that doesn't mean that you can't say no to them. If you feel that there's any issue at all where you just, even if your gut says this doesn't feel right to me, it doesn't feel comfortable, then you need to put your child's safety first, and your all of your comfort level.
Yes, and it's again, never underestimate the power of a willing child, because sometimes the best, funnest ideas come from children. And I remember when Karen was 2 years old, we had the neighbors' children that they would come over and play with my daughter. And one of the kids, the little boy, was back then 7, and he used to kind of Karen would lie on the carpet, and he used to jump around like a frog around her. It required a lot of energy that none of the adults around would have. But that made her so excited that I don't think there was any other opportunity in her life that she was so physically active, next to him on the floor, lying on her back. But still, it was just an incredible thing that none of the adults around could, create. So don't underestimate the power of childhood. And back to interviewing adults and hiring people to do more sophisticated tasks. So, for example, for us, a night shift is a bit of a challenge, because in the middle of the night, if my daughter needs anything, you can't bring her eye gaze communication device and put it in front of her, because for her to activate it, there is like a really bright light shining from the screen, and it needs to kind of, the laser pointers are reading the retina movement, and you can't do it to a sleeping person. The person who stays with her during the night needs to be I guess, fluent enough in her eye gaze communication method that they can understand her and help her without needing the screen to be in front of her. And that takes months to get to, you know, sometimes that level of understanding. And it takes a special person to be gentle enough to help handle pain and manipulation, like physical manipulations during the night without breaking an arm or a leg or whatever. So when I interview people for aides position with my daughter, I try to do three things. One is to be as forward as possible about what the job entails, and to give as many details about it as I possibly can. And that's important, because then you're saving yourself a person kind of, oh, I didn't know that this is a part of my kind of job description, and then they change their mind and leave. But by then it's a little too late, because you already exposed them to your child was exposed to them, your child might like them, and then they never show up again. So you try to lay down the kind of description of the position and all your expectations ahead of time. Now, sometimes when you're hiring first time, this is really hard to do, because you're not sure yourself, like what the position might look like. You're hiring for the first time. So I would recommend saying that, explaining that in the interview, and saying that the person who would be hired would be helping you kind of discover what would be the scope of this position and what they can help you with. And then I would describe also your goals for the position for yourself, that you expect to be working, let's say, in the other room uninterrupted for the entire 4 hours that they're there, for example. And then the person knows that they need to be independent. Or on the other hand, if you're hiring someone as a mother's helper, you're like, I'll be here next to you and I'll be able to help you with anything you need. I just want her to be, let's say, happy and playful. So that would be a good thing to do. Then I explain the kind of emotional attachment that would probably happen on the side of my child. And before I even hire someone, I tell them that this is not a position in which they can call us one day and say, hi, I found a better position in McDonald's. They pay $15 an hour now, so ciao. There is a child here, and the child would be emotionally attached to them. So for them to be able to kind of quit or leave or whatever, we need to ahead of time agree on a strategy, which includes them helping us find, let's say, a replacement, and phasing themselves out slowly by first training the other person. And then maybe if their shift was 4 hours, after a few times that they shadow the new person, or the new person shadow them, then they are there only for 3 hours of the shift, 2 hours of the shift, only 2 shifts a week, and then 1 shift a week, and not there at all. And this is very important to do at the beginning. So there's no surprises when the person needs to leave. They already know that this should be a gradual process, and then it's a little bit less traumatic for your child when an aide leaves. I want to say that we try, at least in our family, to stay in good relationship with all of the aides that work here, because for us, this is our daughter's social circle. And we want these people to stay like friends for life for her and for our family. And it's important for us to get to know them very well. So in an interview, I would really, really try and get to know the person you're interviewing very well, in terms of also their belief systems, the things that are important to them. So I know beyond the technical ability, I can lift 40 pounds, I can be there on time, etc., who this person is and what is their kind of moral standards, what it is that they think about, like dealing with frustration, or handling ambiguous situations, etc. And I think that would really help you find the people that are right for the job, because our children sometimes are very good at pressing buttons for adults and children alike. So we need someone who can really have the emotional stamina to persevere, someone who can stay positive even in a stressful situation, and someone who's extremely patient and able to kind of stand through challenges with your child and not kind of
Run
eliminate
away.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a real, it's funny. One of the reservations I always have about getting someone to stay with Lincoln is um, that they will. I'm worried about them. I'm worried about the caretakers. I'm worried that they will feel overwhelmed, that they will be freaked out by, if he explodes, if he really escalates and, his behavior. And fortunately, that's only happened once with a caretaker. But we try to avoid those types of situations by, like what you're saying, having really clear communication about the in our, we don't talk about the phasing out part. We talk more about what could happen if there is a trigger. So to avoid triggers for him at all costs. And I try to be as clear as possible and to talk about the minutia of what, could trigger him. And usually that works. And if they are, more professional people or even younger people, they will, who are inexperienced, they will be able to get that. Sometimes those types of, triggers are out of their control, and he has escalated. But it's very rare to find a person who won't take that personally, because people who have his syndrome can lash out and say some terrible things once they're in that cycle that they he when he was younger, he would get physical with staff at school. It's never happened with a caretaker because it's the one-on-one is easier for him, but it's really I think it's important to note that for us as the parents, it can be I'm just going to say it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It can be shameful. Our kids, we can't help but feel that they're an extension of ourselves. They are and their behavior sometimes can be really mortifying. So I always worry about the caretakers, that Lincoln will, possibly could say something to them that might be offensive or upsetting or too personal or, too private for them they won't know how to respond. So I get very uncomfortable about that. But, I explained that in the beginning, please don't take it personally. If this, God forbid, this actually does happen, I tell them how to deal with it if it happens. And again, fortunately, it's only happened one time with a caretaker in all these years, but it was bad. It was ugly. And, she did come back. I was shocked she was willing to come back, and she did. And I really, I think it's really important to acknowledge the people in your world who are working with your kids. They're doing a really important job, and to respect them as much as possible and to celebrate their birthday. If you know that something's coming up, obviously if they are sick or if they're, to be kind about it. If it's happening a lot, that might be something to talk about, because it is important for continuity for our kids to have that person show up when they say they're going to show up. I'm reminded of, this wasn't someone that I hired, but it was someone hired by the school who was Lincoln's aide in class. I think he was in first, or I think it was first grade. And the aide was absent all the time. And it was those absences where it's like on a Friday or a Monday. So it looked a little suspicious, like they were taking long weekends. And after many, many absences that caused many problems for Lincoln, because he didn't have that structure and that continuity, and he was young, he would have tantrums in school, and he would get anxious because other people would then have to deal with him, or a sub, and they didn't know how to deal with him, and he would get triggered. So there were so many problems every time his aide was absent. So his aide was absent many, many times, and ended up quitting from the school. And I asked the school if I felt like this was a form. We've talked about activism in other episodes. This to me was a form of activism where I wrote the aide a letter and I gave it to the school, who was still dealing with him on his, he wasn't dismissed, but on his departure from the school. And I wrote a letter to him, and I wrote it from the perspective of the parent, myself. And I said, I'm not sure you're aware of, the trauma that is caused by your absences and he didn't give any notice. That was another thing. That's why it was really egregious. He just kind of like quit and took off. And it didn't end well with the school. They were very unhappy with the way he dealt with his job. And I wrote him a letter saying, I hope that you do not, this is a career for people who are dedicated to children, and you knew that Lincoln, needed this type of continuity and how important it was for him to have this relationship and what it meant when you weren't there, because we had told him, time and time again. So I wrote him a whole letter saying, I hope you do not continue in this field if this is how you're going to carry out your job. This is, you are dealing with children who need you. And I don't remember what else I wrote, but they gave him the letter. And I felt like maybe this kid thought, and he was young. He was in his early 20s, but I did not want this kid working in the field with children with disabilities. And I wrote him that letter, and, it might have done nothing, but it might have, there was my little, I felt a need to do that for the greater good, for the greater population. And they said that they would never hire him back at the school because of his history as a paraprofessional. So those, I haven't had too many negative experiences, but they're very traumatic when they do happen, because you can't help but feel like it's an abandonment in some way of your child if they're not taking it seriously. And it's very hard to, we're in that position a lot. People who have children who cannot be independent are, for the rest of their lives, they're going to be in positions where their caretakers, their helpers, typically are not paid well. And there's a lot of transition. And, of all people in the population, our kids, are extra vulnerable, oftentimes emotionally and physically. And it is painful to have to go through so many transitions, and it's hard. It's most hard on the children who can't understand that they're leaving because the pay isn't great, because this is an extra job for them. It's hard not to have it affect the children, because these are relationships. No matter what kind of a role they're playing, they are spending time with your children, and your children have some kind of attachment to them. So to have them leave, and oftentimes it's a very brisk, what's the word? They leave without notice. Yes. And that's really painful. Never get to say goodbye. They might have gotten fired. They might have just taken off, and it is hard. And we are often in a position where we have to explain to our child why this respite worker, had to move on. They had to they finished college, so they were done. Well, didn't she want to continue seeing me after college? And to have to explain, they're busy. It's really tough. It's really tough. They get attached.
Yeah.
So it's something that you didn't mention, Iris, that I know that you do, is you ask for a commitment of at least, a certain amount of time, so that at least they feel a little bit of pressure to stay. Sometimes there are situations that require them, they have to leave, but to really try to get people who are going to commit to a certain amount of time, so you're not constantly having to transition to a new person.
Yes, and that brings to mind another thing. I think you touched about the fact that when a family has the budget and the ability to pay, they can pay as much as they want. And then obviously it's easier to retain people long term because the pay is excellent. But if a family is dependent on pay from a state or an agency, this is the field that is most undercompensated. In the United States, and this is like raw statistics from like very recently, it's a lecture I listened to like 2 days ago. So in the United States, 80% of the aides for people with disabilities are women, and 60% of them are women of color. So it's kind of a segment of the population that is being anyway undercompensated, but specifically for this job and all that it entails, it's a tragedy. It's just infuriating.
Very hard work. This is hard
very
work.
hard work. It requires a person not just to do the physical, mechanical things of it, but to really be there emotionally and psychologically for the child and their family. And that's very, very hard. And I always say that the things, when we have good aides, the things that they bring to the table, the things that they do for Karen, the achievements that she gets or gains from being with them, is something that I can't compensate even if I pay them with gold. It's like there is no monetary value to their contribution. But it is extremely hard to think about how undercompensated people in this field are. And this is why when I hire people, I try to hire people that have a different motivation than money to work in this line of work. Many times the people that I hire are young professionals or students that are studying in a relevant field. They are there because they needed the hands-on experience. They are there because they want to gain something that would help them through their schoolwork. They sometimes need the hours to kind of qualify for their internship. And that's a population that can see the value in the experience beyond the pay. And it's another way or strategy for our family to find people that are very qualified and cognitively well, that are in this field because they find the value in the experience. For us, because Karen has so much durable medical equipment that is extremely expensive and also dangerous to manipulate. If I want to allow her to go out and about with an aide, I need to know that the aide would be not only able to keep the child safe, the service dog safe, and keep the equipment kind of working, that she would know what to do in case of emergency. And it's a complicated job, and you need to have highly qualified individuals, and usually highly qualified individuals would be in different careers rather than home health aides for kids with disabilities. So that was our bridge to finding people that are very capable but would still be interested in this line of work. And a couple of things that you mentioned that I think are very important is to always ask the person, why are they here? Why are they interested in this position? And in addition to what you said about, asking them how long they can commit to, is also to ask them about their 2-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan. And in that way, I always find that I get the true story about their plan and how our expectation of them being here for 2-3 years is unrealistic. Sometimes also young people maybe want to commit, but they find it, bless you, they find it hard to kind of connect the dots. If you're transferring to a different university in a year, you can't be here for 2 years, mind you. So it's very important to have the conversation. I have my husband join me for those interviews, so we have 2 pairs of eyes kind of and 2 pairs of brains thinking about the right question to kind of like really align expectations. And it is very important. I think that it's also a smart thing to do, to tell someone that the first couple of weeks, months are a trial period,
Yes.
And then they know that it's like it's still not something that is very firm, and later on to kind of commit to something more as time goes by. At the end of the day, again, sorry. In conclusion, I love saying at
We're
the end
thinking
of the
of,
day.
yeah.
I think that some of the people that we crossed paths with because of Karen and because of her care needs are just incredible individuals that I would never had the pleasure to spend so much time with. Younger professionals that I know are onto like bright futures and extremely successful careers. And it's a privilege and an honor for our family to have them to have them spend some time with us, because I know that they are so highly qualified and they'll do so much good later on in their lives. And I try to also focus on that and those people, especially when we get burnt by others and that the hiring is not successful. For example, we had a period of time that because Karen was becoming a teenager and wanted to get more involved, that she would sit in for the interviews with us and ask people questions. But then many times we had a situation that she really wanted to hire someone and that person didn't want to take the job after the interview. And then she would get extremely insulted because it was like going on a date with someone and being rejected. And that became really complicated. And unfortunately, as much as I want to train her to be independent and take as much control over her life circumstances, I had to go in and to kind of buffer her from this experience because it was really painful and hurtful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's a big part of this. It's a form of rejection. It really is. It's hard not to feel upset when you've personally committed to someone. You've allowed them into your world, into your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly that they see, and then they don't want it. And it's hard to go through that over and over and over again. Before we close, I just wanted to add one more thing about, we've talked in other episodes about, how to find your people, where to meet people, so you can learn about resources. A great way to find people to hire is from your community and asking your local colleges to post in these classes where where whatever they're learning is relevant to the job. So, for example, special education, nursing, psychiatry, all of these different fields, phys ed, for a kid who is studying to be a gym teacher, it might be great for a boy or a girl who needs to, run a lot and do these energetic things. These are all places where we'll get the context that we really need, or we'll have people who have already hired these people, but they don't need them anymore, or they don't fit into their schedule, and then you can take them. So talk to your community. Go on social media on Facebook for people in your area. Go to your local schools and colleges and doctors' offices. Ask the doctors if they know, and then the nurses if they know of anyone who, anyone related to these fields could be a great resource.
Alma,
yes.
Thank you very much for those tips and for another interesting conversation. Obviously, we will have people involved in our lives for the longevity of our children's life, because we are always dependent on others' help. And it's maybe an extension of Finding Your People episode about finding your friends and support system emotionally. It's finding the physical help of having the aides there to really support our kids' development and well-being on a daily basis. So thank you.
Thank you. And we'll continue this discussion because there's a lot more. There's a lot more to say. All right. The phone's ringing again. It's my son's school. So we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
For more information, please go to www.twomomsknowfluff.com. Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give it a 5-star rating so more people can hear it. Thank you.